Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Grey Matter. Today, we have a guest on the program whom I've been trying to get onto the program for a couple of months. You know, at the risk of sounding like a misogynist, I know the CBC has hit me with that label. One cannot help but admire a woman who is capable of showing intelligence and toughness, and also who is very principled. I can think of people like Margaret Thatcher, come to mind, and also many of the excellent lawyers and judges who I've known throughout my career. The lady we have on today is one such a woman. She's a leader. Her name is Christine Anderson, and she's joining us from her role in the European Union Parliament. As we always do, we're going to start off by framing our discussion in terms of a couple of quotations. And because Christine hails from Deutschland, Germany, I have quotations from a couple of German speakers. One is an Austrian economist, a famous man who I'm sure Christine knows. His name was Hayek, F.A. Hayek, and he famously wrote that emergencies have always been the pretext on which the safeguards of individual liberty have been forced. Of course, that's part of what we're going to be talking about today. And then I have another one from a German philosopher named Immanuel Kant, and he famously said, "The master is himself an animal and needs a master." And I think that applies specifically to our Prime Minister. So who do we have on today? Well, we're privileged to have Christine Anderson. She is part of the Alternative for Deutschland party. And I'm going to get her to explain a little bit of what that party is about and what its policies and philosophy is. But before we go there, I want to just describe a little bit about Christine. Of course, my understanding is she's from Germany. However, she's on the Committee on Culture and Education. She's also on the Committee on Women's Rights and Gender Equality. She's on the Committee of Inquiry to investigate the use of Pegasus and equivalent surveillance spyware. And I understand that she also spent some time being educated in the United States in economics, and that may explain why her German is excellent. Although people in Canada will be surprised to learn that English language is readily available to most Germans. And my understanding is, or at least there was a time, I've spent some time in Germany, and most Germans know at least 3 languages. And I'm sure she's no exception. But why are we interested in talking with Christine Anderson? Well, of course, she's been very brave and very outspoken in her, not only the defense of human rights and her defense of democracy and liberty, but in questioning the behavior of our own Prime Minister. And I think it's important to note that what she actually said, and this was recently in a couple of months ago in the European Parliament. And Devin, do we have the clip to show?
Thank you. Based on Article 195, out that it would have been more appropriate for Mr. Trudeau, Prime Minister of Canada, to address this House according to Article 144, an article which was specifically designed to debate violations of human rights, democracy and the rule of law, which is clearly the case with Mr. Trudeau. Then again, a Prime Minister who openly admires the Chinese basic dictatorship, who tramples on fundamental rights by persecuting and criminalizing his own citizens as terrorists just because they dared to stand up to his perverted concept of democracy, should not be allowed to speak in this House at all. Mr. Trudeau, you are a disgrace for any democracy. Please spare us your presence. Thank you.
Just brilliant. Thank you so much for that on behalf of all Canadians who believe and value freedom. And Christine Anderson, thank you so much for being with us today and for taking the time. We know you're incredibly busy. Welcome to Grey Matter.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be on.
All right. I want to get into some of the topics that I know are very important to you that you are speaking about actively in the European Parliament. But before we go there, I wonder if you wouldn't mind just giving us a brief biography of yourself, telling us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, and your family background, your educational background, and how you got involved in politics, and also a little bit about your party and its platform and what it stands for.
All right, so I was born and raised in Western Germany, and that was actually due to the fact that my parents decided to flee GDR. My dad was imprisoned in GDR in a political prison. The worst of the kind they had over there was called Bautzen, and he was sentenced to 25 years of hard labor. What did he do wrong? Well, he opposed the communism system over there. He asked uncomfortable questions. And as you can imagine, in a dictatorship, that doesn't go down too well. So he was eventually arrested. And fortunately, he only had to serve 5 of those 25 years. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here. So he was once he got back home, he still wouldn't shut up. So he was supposed to get arrested again, but that time he was warned. So my dad fled the country in '59, and my mom followed him with my 2 older sisters in May of '61. So that's basically, a little family history here, which might explain why I very strongly and firmly advocate for freedom, democracy, and the rule of law, because I just know how easily it can be taken away, and the horror that the citizens have to endure under a totalitarian regime. And I don't ever want that to happen to anyone anymore or anytime. That's why I'm trying to do my best in everything I can to prevent that from happening.
Is that why you entered into politics, Christine? Is that you have this background?
That was actually an act of self-defense, if you will. I mean, as long as I can remember, I've always voted for the Conservative and the Libertarian Party we have over here, which is the Christian Democrats, and the other one is called the FDP, supposedly libertarian, but they betrayed their principles. And in 2005, I still voted for them, but in 2009, I no longer could do so because they had drifted so far to the left, actually, that I was no longer capable of voting for them. But there was no other party, so I just went to the ballots and voted invalid, because not voting isn't an option at all. Because by doing this, you actually support the parties you don't want to be in power anymore. So I voted invalid. And then in 2013, I heard on the TV of some new party that had just been founded. So, and I was, immediately electrified. I was like, I got to learn more about this. So it was basically Euro skeptical as our currency, and skeptical of EU. And I was like, yeah, that's the right direction. So I researched it, and I filled out an application to become a member of this party on that day. And that's how I became involved in politics.
So the leftist media calls your party, the AFD, a far-right party. I expect that's probably not true. And so what I'm interested to know, if you could tell us, what are its actual values and political agenda? I gather from hearing you talk and hearing you speak publicly that the party has a very strong human rights, individual responsibility, and rule of law based platform. Is that correct?
That is correct. And first of all, I would like to say I'm not far right. Their problem is we have just been right so far. That's the difference, and that's why they keep slandering us and calling us names. Because you're right. My party has become a nuisance to them, because we actually do go back to what democracy is all about, and we take a look at it, and we basically tell the people our democratic system has been perverted to an extent that it's almost unrecognizable anymore. And they're being so sneaky about it too. I mean, if anyone showed up, wanting to erect a dictatorship or whatever and started rounding people up and locking them up, all hell would break loose. They're not going to do this. They take step by step. They always have a very logical reason, of course, for infringing on fundamental rights. For instance, as you saw with the COVID pandemic, it's all for our own good, for our health and all of that. But none of that was necessary. And there are so many things where they're trying to do this. I mean, think about hate speech or disinformation. It's censorship. But they're not calling it censorship, and they will not tell you we are, actually censoring you here. No, it's, to create this better world and everyone is polite to each other and so on. So they're really sneaky about this. And my party is actually exposing all of that. And we are trying to, look through the smoke screen they're putting up there. And we're trying to let the citizens know, while they may be telling you this, that, and the other, it's really not about that. It's about something entirely different. And this is what they really want to achieve. So it's kind of like what they're doing is, look over here, but do not look over here. We don't want to see this. So it's like putting up these smoke screens. And we are a threat to them, because they're so comfortable in their parliaments, and it must be a heck of a lot of fun to sit here and, to talk about nonsense and no one contradicting it. I get that. That must be a great life. But sorry, when we are around, it is not that great life anymore, because they have to listen to us no matter what they try. And they try a lot of things, not having to listen to us. But in parliament, they have to. And they're just fearing for their mandates. They're fearing that for the position, that was provided such a great life for them. But they seem to have forgotten who elected them and what they were elected to do.
Right.
And we are basically here to let the people know and let the other MEPs know what their job really is. And that makes them really, really angry, because they would have much rather liked the public not to find out about their scheme. But here we are, and we're doing that.
Excellent. I suspect that the same people who are calling your party far right are the ones who think that the Nazis were far right. Actually, the Nazis were so far left, they put socialism in the name. And the difference between fascism and communism, if you understand it, is the difference of degree rather than kind, right? The other thing that, just listening to you, I'm reminded of is a quotation. I forget who said it, but that a politician is one who uses their position to be a master, whereas a statesperson, a stateswoman, or a statesman is one who uses their public life and their public office in the service of others, of their constituents. And it sounds like that's how you see your role, which I have to say is most refreshing. So who is the leader of your party, Christine? Are you the leader, or are you in the deputy leadership position right now?
No, I'm not. The leader of my party right now is Tino Kropala. He was elected, I think, 3 years ago. Yeah, but we're about to have another Congress convention, and we will vote, basically a totally new board chair, if you will. So but he is our leader right now.
Are you seeking the leadership of the party?
No, I don't. Not at this point.
Okay.
I might run for the board. But I haven't decided yet whether or not I want to do that.
Okay. The other thing I wanted to ask you about is what has being part of the EU experience been like for Germany? I from over here in Canada, it looks as though the relationship between the member states and the European Parliament is, to say the least, complicated. Has being part of the EU been a good thing for Germany overall?
Oh boy, what a question.
Sorry.
No. Has not only has it not been good for Germany, it hasn't been good for any member state, because that actually is the problem. We started out as, states coming together, figuring out, how to work on specific problems and how we could better deal with that. like the free trade zone, and it started actually out as the coal and steel a trade framework, but from that they, kept going and going and going. And what we're looking at now is that they are trying to establish an EU superstate, kind of like the United States of America, but doing it over here with the European countries. The problem I think is problematic, because you have different European peoples, and they all have their own history, their own faith, they have their own language. And basically what it leads to is, if we were to form, such a super state, these nations, these peoples would be deprived of their right to self-determination, and it's associated with a lot of other problems. How is it? There is no such thing as a European people. It's many different European peoples. So how would I be able to come to a political understanding about some issue I would like to have addressed, let alone reach a consensus with people that don't even speak my language? That I'm not capable of understanding the Greek people or the Spanish people or the Italians. So how are we supposed to come up, to form an opinion on anything? Well, that's kind of like how it's supposed to work here in the EU. They don't want the people to talk among each other. They just, want to sit up there and basically dictate and tell them, well, we got it all figured out. Don't worry about it. You might still go to the ballots, but, we will do everything for you. So there's various problems. And when you see the EU institutions, please do not make the mistake of thinking they are democratically structured. They're not. They're actually a gross violation of any principle in democracy you can think of. So these institutions were basically put up they're the very means to undermine democracy, freedom, and the rule of law. So we talk, for instance, about, the EU Parliament itself. It is not democratically elected. The problem is it's a gross violation of the principle one man, one vote. That is about how it's comprised. The seats are allocated to the member states, but they do not take into consideration how many people live in these member states, the population. So that leads to the fact that Germany, every German deputy will need more than 850,000 votes to get one seat in the House. But from Malta, and every deputy from Malta, he only needs 64,000 votes to get one seat in the House. This is unheard of, but they're, doing it anyways. So the European Parliament doesn't have any real rights. Basically, we have no rights whatsoever. We are just talking and talking. We're, voting on resolutions, basically begging letters, to the Commission, if they could please do this, that, and the other. But the Commission doesn't have to do anything, what we say. So it's like they're the government, not elected, by the way, and they're just home free, So the European Parliament, EU Parliament, I should say, we don't have any powers to actually and effectively control Commission. We are there as the elected representative of the European peoples. We are there to do their bidding. And so there's something majorly wrong with this picture. Right. Then you go on to the Council of the European Union. And the Council of the European Union is the ones making the laws. They are the legislative on EU level. The problem is the legislative is comprised of members of the national executive. So there you go, forget about division of power, because what the members of the national governments do, let's say they want to pass a law in Germany, in the German Bundestag. And the German Bundestag, the members there say, no, we don't want this law. We won't pass it. Don't get approval. It doesn't matter. Then the respective secretary or minister, he just travels to Brussels. And there he sits, in the legislative, and they just pass law on EU level, which then goes back as an EU directive, and it has to be implemented in the member states. And this is sickening when you think about it.
Mhm.
The problem is people are not being told that it is exactly this way. And most people, they do not bother to really get into the, the system, how these mechanisms actually work. So they just, if they're told we're all Democrats here, they simply believe it. So this is, in and of, it's very, very problematic. And that's why I have a really major problem with the EU itself. And interestingly enough, the former president of EU Parliament, Martin Schulz, he is a social democrat from Germany. He actually said one day, if the EU were a state and applied for membership in the EU, it would have to be turned down and denied because it lacks democratic structure. Can you believe this?
That's
so
shocking.
they know perfectly well, but nonetheless, they keep pushing it.
So essentially, it sounds as though it's resulted in a disintegration, almost a destruction of the sovereignty of the member states.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And they keep going and going and going. And the EU Commission, they don't care whether or not they have a competence in a certain area. They just do whatever the heck they want.
Well, let me ask you about something else, because it also has application to Canada. And that is, I've read that Germany was one of the European nations that welcomed many of the refugees in 2015, for example, Syrians. And I read a book written by a man named Douglas Murray, you might be familiar with, called The Strange Death of Europe. It's a fascinating book. And he said something in the book that struck a chord with me. And I never thought of it in this way, but he described the European peoples, the Germans, the French, Italians, Greeks, and so on, as the indigenous people of Europe.
Exactly.
That is the natural home of all of those European peoples, and that they are functionally being displaced through this mass migration. And then in combination with that, so we have all of these people moving in who don't share the things you talked about: language, culture, art, history, and of course, Germany is one of the richest cultural traditions of any nation in the world, and they've donated so much of that with the rest of the Western world, especially. But on top of that, you're saying you're having sort of that degree of assault. But then at the same time, Germany's losing sovereignty. This must be something that's of tremendous concern within Germany.
Yes, you're right, and it is. But you kind of have to understand, especially the German people, we have been trained and we have been taught to hate ourselves. That is because of Nazi Germany. And that was the most horrible time we in Europe ever had to endure, but we were taught to hate ourselves to an extent that there is a lot of Germans, they're ashamed to be German, and they would rather abolish Germany altogether. And the worst part of it is there is actually leading politicians who openly say, I wish France would border to Poland and Poland would border to France. Well, what does that mean? Wipe out Germany in between? But that's pretty much, that's a big problem. So, but on the other hand, it's like, just if you continue to think this through, I mean, we have a pretty well-built welfare system here in Germany. Well, if you teach the people to hate their own country, how do you expect them to be willing to contribute to the community in country? Why should I pay taxes to a community that I hate anyways? You see, but they're so twisted in their mind. But yeah, it's absolutely true. And another thing is, of course, I mean, the narrative simply does not allow to think of a majority white people as indigenous. That's a contradiction, because indigenous people are, per definition, a persecuted minority, or at least a discriminated minority, and they're provided with, all the kind of support from the left and the Greens and whatever, which is good, which is actually good that they're, advocating for this. But for God's sakes, yes, the European people, there are indigenous people too. So do we really have to wait to be marginalized to a very small minority before we can, ask for the same courtesy of our culture, our languages, and our countries to be preserved? Does it really have to come to this point? And there are so many things when you really start questioning them and, get a clear perspective on it. What does that actually mean? I mean, I just wonder, how can anyone come to another different conclusion than what I just said here?
Well, this is very fascinating because, as you probably realize, a similar phenomenon is happening in North America through the propagation of critical race theory, diversity, inclusion, equity, where also Canadians are being taught to hate our country. And to segue into the Freedom Convoy, as you know, we're going there. A big part of the reason why the government here reacted so strongly against that is because it was an expression of nationalism and pride in our flag, which, by the way, has now lawyers for the Canadian government have described the Canadian flag as a hate symbol. And our Prime Minister has described pride in our country as something called over-nationalism. He tends to come up with strange words. He also came up with a word called people kind. I'm not sure what that is, but the point is, we seem to be going through a similar phenomenon in the Western world, in Europe and North America, where especially our youth are being taught to hate our culture, hate our flag, hate our traditions, and not value them and carry them forward. What do you think is the agenda behind that?
Well, it seems quite obvious. If you have a national state and a people that has been historically had the opportunity to grow together, they share the same fate, and that binds people together. It's kind of like a family too. A family is the strongest natural group of solidarity you can have. But you have the same with, an historically formed people. They stick together. So, and as long as they have this, how should I put this? These people to fall back on, and as long as they have these people to be supported by, it's very difficult for any outsider, let's say a government gone rogue. It's very hard for them to break that open. So in order to get control of the people is to undermine their support system. That's what psychopaths do. If they want to gain control over any person, they break up their support system. They bash into families, separate them, isolate them, gaslighting. There's a lot of that going on, And look at it. That's actually what governments are doing, So they're trying to break up that, bonding of solidarity, that's sticking together. And there are so many ways they're trying to do this. You just said, we're being taught to hate ourselves. Then you have the next thing. Look at gender ideology. What the very foundation of what makes us humans, our understanding of who we are, is now being completely trashed by telling us you can be anything you want. You sure you are a woman or a man, but if you change your mind, no problem. We, perform surgery on you and we'll get, but the thing is, that's our identity, our personality, it's fundamentally based on that. So if you tell people you can be anything at any time and even switch any which way you want to, maybe even combine all of this, in the end, they will be nothing. You have no identity anymore, no personality anymore. And that works. That works for the agenda of basically having people as a malleable mass. They don't want you to have a personality anymore. They don't want you to have an identity anymore that you could fall back on. They want you to be part of a malleable mass that they will move to whatever spot they need you to move to, and there you're to perform whatever they tell you to do over there. So if you take away the very identity of people, and that especially goes for children, and they're not stopping at them, but if you take all of that away from the people, especially from children, you can do with them whatever the heck you want. And that's what they're aiming at. And so being embedded into a people and into a national state, that also is difficult. They will not be able to get a hold of you and to effectively make you a part of a malleable mass.
Christine, it seems to me, I'm glad that you brought up this idea of gender ideology. I'm interested to get your take on this because from where I stand, it seems to me that the transgender movement seems to be a targeted attack on women.
Yeah,
women seem to be the most disaffected group. There was a book that was published over here called Irreparable Damage that it basically told the tale of how this transgenderism is skyrocketing in young girls, teenage girls. Right. And then when you consider how even the definition, you talked about the family. Well, let's face it, the foundation of the family are mothers. And so if we don't even know what a woman is, and we can't even describe what a woman is, how do we have motherhood? We're starting to call mothers birthing people. Yeah, and then you look to, for example, what's happening with men who identify as women going into prisons and electing to go into female prison populations, and then raping and impregnating, victimizing women. It seems to me the transgender movement it really, really outpaces and dwarfs the threat of the patriarchy as an assault upon women, and very intelligent women. For example, the author of the Harry Potter novels, she identifies this very clearly as a feminist, and of course she's vilified as a TERF. So do you agree that this seems to be this transgenderism seems to be a calculated attack on women?
Yeah, that's just another aspect to it. I mean, you brought it up. If a Supreme Court appointee is no longer capable of defining a woman, I mean, gee. I read this article in the New York Times. It was basically about feminine hygiene products. And in this entire article, they never once mentioned the word woman or girls. You know what they called them? Menstruators. Can you believe this? I mean, I really take objection to that. I am very sorry.
So you should.
I know. And it's like, yeah, it seems to me it is an attack on women. And the effect it has on women's sports. I mean, yes. It's well known. I mean, where are all the women? I mean, there was a time when, women did not have the right, the equal opportunities, But what happened to the women fighting for that? They're now just standing by and looking at all go down the drain. Because some dude, walks up and says, "Hey, I'm a woman now, and I want to go into the female population." And then on top of all of that, when a female inmate then does file a complaint about, having been raped, they deny it outright because the definition, I don't remember where exactly it was, might have been in the States somewhere. Per definition, a rape could have only have taken part or place between a man and a woman. And they said, well, since there are no men in this female population, there could not have been a rape. Well, what they didn't say is that the dude that did rape that other female inmate, well, he just claimed to have been a woman. I mean, it's absurd. Like I said, Leah Thomas, she was a nobody. She was in rank 487 in the swimming competition. And now she is, blasting one record after the other. I mean, now I was like, what kind of gratification does he get out of this? I mean, it used to be, men beating up on women or beating women used to be considered cowards. And that's exactly what Leah Thomas is. He is a coward, I mean, if he's
And a
not
cheat.
man enough,
And a
if he's
cheater.
not man enough to compete against other men, then get the heck out of here.
Well, by way of segue, Christine, I want to talk about our Prime Minister a little bit. And by the way, he's a self-described feminist. Although his brand of feminism is he tends to put women who are of some ability but have very little experience. He gives them very difficult jobs, and then watches them fail, and then watches them take the fall for his bad decisions. So that's the brand of feminist that our Prime Minister is, and this has happened many, many times. And women, any women of principle, when they discover what he's like, they always leave. But I wanted to ask you about our Prime Minister now. You've said some things about him publicly that were very pointed. And you actually have a tweet of yours where you wrote, yesterday, Canada's Prime Minister visited the EU Parliament to give a speech. And you say, I took the opportunity to give him an appropriate welcome, in quotations there, short, concise, and hitting the bullseye, exclamation point. I could not agree more. My question for you, though, is, I think I have a sense of the answer from what you've told us. What was it that caused you to take such an interest in what was happening in Canada? And the reason why I asked, Christine, is that those of us in Canada, I think, are suffering from a bit of a media blackout. Our mass media is not really telling the true tale of what's going on. And my sense is that those of you in Europe have a clearer picture, are getting a truer picture, or a very different perspective of what's happening in Canada. And so this is why I'm very interested to hear from you about why you were so concerned about what Justin Trudeau was doing.
Well, first of all, I will have to disappoint you. The picture we're getting here isn't any clearer than the ones you're getting over there, because corporate media is doing exactly the same thing over here, as you might imagine. Because that's, like you mentioned earlier, it is happening in all Western democracies. And this is actually the scary part. If it was just one country going rogue, or maybe two, trying to erect a totalitarian regime, I kind of would have hoped that we can rely on the other countries in the Western community, in the Western hemisphere, just eventually step in and put a stop to it. But since it's happening everywhere, who the heck is going to step in and bail us out? So, but the same thing is happening over here. So the information that I had is basically, I just do what I do. I turned off my TV a long time ago. I don't watch it anymore. It was very beneficial to my mental health and my, being overall. I will have to say that. So I just, get my information from the internet, alternate media, and which is actually good that we have that right now, because otherwise we didn't stand a chance. We would not stand a chance at all. So luckily we do have that. And the reason I did take such an interest in what was going on in Canada was just because, I have to say it time and time again, the Freedom Truckers, my God, they were amazing. Finally something was happening, on a scale that could no longer be ignored. So I was following that, and I was like, gosh, thank God, finally something is doing something. So obviously, I did take a strong interest in how are they going to deal with it over there? What's the coverage going to be? I had a feeling it was going to turn out just the way it did turn out, that they were trying to shut it down. And I'm kind of always on the side of the underdog, and the people are the underdog in this fight, going against the government. That is tough. I mean, my dad went to jail for it, so I do understand it is tough. So I always figure, anyone doing it, deserves whatever support he can get, and I'm always there and try to do my best to support just that. So, and then, it was very clear how this went, because Trudeau just stepped down on them, targeted them, like I said, as terrorists. And that's actually what I expect from someone who is trying to erect a totalitarian regime without wanting to let anyone know that he's doing this. So the signs were all there, and it's just so frustrating that if they do it time and time again, and they are unfortunately successful in gaslighting the people into thinking, we're doing this to preserve democracy. So whenever I see something like that going on, I just can't help myself. I just, have to point at it. I have to point it out. I have to talk about it, to try to make people aware of what's going on. Because once we've lost freedom, democracy, and the rule of law, we are screwed. I'm sorry. Because the technological possibilities they have nowadays, it's going to be very, very hard to fight back and to overturn it. Because I'm pretty convinced, if the Soviets or even in GDR, if these regimes back then had the technological methods, they would have never gone down. They would still be around,
Right.
I mean, there is no limit to what they can do nowadays. And that is really, really scary.
The parallel you draw between Canada and what happened in the GDR is a very apt one, and because I know, of course, you described your own history there, but I did some of my own research, and I discovered in the early years of the DDR, that it wasn't always a situation where people were prohibited from leaving the country. Originally, they were just discouraged from leaving, and then the restrictions gradually increased. And it was only in 1961 when the wall was erected. But in Canada, you're probably aware, there are nearly 7 million of us that are prisoners in our own country. We cannot board a train, a ship, or an airplane, and we're restricted from entering the United States unless we have these vaccinations. And so I don't think it's at all an exaggeration for you to compare what's going on in Canada, what was going on in the GDR. The other thing I wanted to ask you about, Christine, I know you're very, very obviously a very strong advocate of the policies that you describe, but the other one that is very, very topical right now is a fight that I know you are engaged in, and this is involving the WHO pandemic treaty. And I've listened to some of your speeches. Devin, do we have a clip on that one?
Dear colleagues, you might not be aware, but the abolition of democracy by the global elites continues. On March 3rd, the EU Commission was authorized by the Council to renegotiate the treaty with the World Health Organization on behalf of the member states. Under the guise of improving global pandemic response, the plan is to allow the WHO to seize executive governance powers of the member states in a case of a pandemic. Granting governance powers to non-elected body is the exact opposite of democratic recourse and takes away any possibility for the people to hold officials accountable. This amounts to no less than disenfranchising the people. We, as elected representatives by the people, for the people, must not allow this to happen. I am imploring you, do what you were elected to do. Look into this and protect the rights of the people you were elected by to act in their best interest. And to all the people in Europe, I would like to say, start acting now. Write to your MEPs. Let them know you will not tolerate to be stripped of your rights to democratic recourse. Let them know that any MEP supporting this or voting for this will not ever get your vote again.
I must say, Christine, you really are a brilliant orator. There's just, when you're talking publicly, you have a charisma. It's very hard not to pay very close attention to what you're saying. And you really get your point across.
But I have to admit, it's kind of disciplining here in the EU Parliament, because our speaking time is strictly limited to like 60 seconds, 90 seconds. If I'm really lucky, I may have 120 seconds. So that really is very disciplining. So you have to get to the point, and you have to cut to the chase. Otherwise, you don't get your message across.
You certainly do. This treaty, is this the next phase of the pandemic response? Is this sort of chapter 2? We went through, over 2 years of restrictions of liberty, of expanding the power of the global state. Is this treaty now the next phase, the intervention of this global elite into the national sovereignties of nations? Is that what's happening right now in your view?
Right. You started out this question whether or not this WHO treaty was the next phase of this pandemic. No, it's not a phase of this pandemic. The latter part of your question was the correct one. Okay. It is the next phase of seizing control of all of the national states. It does cut into sovereign nations and taken their rights away. That's what that is aiming for. Because when you look at it, I mean, you will have a non-elected body, but the richest of the super rich buy their way in, and they're basically funding it. I don't even need to mention any names right now, because it doesn't matter.
Bill Gates.
Yeah, you take this name and replace it by any other name.
Right.
So it's that's not the point. The point is that multi-billionaires, just buy their way in to this body, and then to even think of the possibility of them seizing executive powers over national states. I mean, you would actually have to be brain dead to not see how this is a major infringement on the people's rights. So anyone advocating for this, or anyone even believing that this might be a good idea, is just insane and out of his mind. But once again, what they did, they take this pandemic now, they kept the people in fear, they trumped it up, blew it completely out of proportion, told everyone how really dangerous all of this is. And actually, I just came back from Sweden. They didn't have any restrictions over there, no lockdown, no masks, nothing. And the entire world, they were convinced all of the Swedish people were just going to be wiped off the planet because for their stupidity, of letting this virus run wild. Well, nothing happened in Sweden, and why should it? But they're taking this pandemic now, or what they made it out to be, as the excuse to get people behind the idea that a non-elected body, that there is no one you can politically hold accountable anymore. They will run things now. I mean, it is sickening what is going on. And once again, it is frustrating that people are not capable of seeing through that.
So as a lawyer, I'm curious about the mechanics of this treaty and how they could, through in one fell swoop, could take away the sovereignty of the member nations. For example, in Canada, I expect in Germany it's the same thing, that you have a national constitution that is the supreme law of the land. So how would this treaty sort of invade that? like a virus and take over.
Yeah. Well, we're not clear on how they actually want to pull this off. The sad thing is the EU Parliament does not play a formal role in these negotiations, because the EU Commission was, granted the competence to, deal or negotiate that on behalf of the member states. So how they were actually going to pull it off, I wouldn't be able to say. But I would assume it works just as any other treaty. The governments, the elected governments of the national states, they basically sign this treaty and are then bound by it. So in case that there is another pandemic or the same pandemic, that just revive whatever, they will then seize all of the executive powers necessary to contain or to basically handle this pandemic. Another problematic thing is, I mean, the WHO, they are the ones actually calling out a pandemic. So it's kind of like, not only am I the one in charge of saying when there is a pandemic, once I've done so, I will get all the power. And this is absurd.
It sounds like what lawyers call a conflict of interest.
Well, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So, Christine, the last thing I want to ask you is obviously, you're a very strong advocate for human rights, the rights of the individual, the rule of law, democracy. Do you have any advice for individuals, whether in Germany or Canada, United States, anywhere, who are still quote unquote in the free world? Where steps they can take in their daily lives, their active lives, that might help, because I know there's a great sense of helplessness, and I'm sure your constituents share this with you.
Yes.
And so part of the interest that I have, and I know that you share from listening to you, is how do we empower people? How do we give people the courage to stand up and do what they did, for example, in the Freedom Convoy? Do you have any advice for people who are listening to this podcast that might give them some hope and some ideas about things that they can do? Because action is always better, right? When you're frustrated.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Well, yeah, actually, first of all, I would tell all the people, turn off your darn TV set.
That's number one.
Turn it off. It's making you sick, and it's making you believe all of the BS that they want you to believe, So don't buy into their narratives. Get other sources of information, double check research. Don't believe anyone just because he sounds smart. Like me, for instance, don't believe me, just look the stuff up yourself and think for yourself, come to your own conclusion. Don't be intimidated. And I know it can be intimidating, if you're called Nazi or right-wing extremist or, Islamophobe, whatever, so what? They called you a name. Well, big deal, So just kind of like be above this, don't let it bother you. Then what you can do is, on an everyday basis, when you go to the grocery store or whatever, just standing in line, trying to pay or whatever, talk to people, but don't overwhelm them. Don't, push them towards any opinion. You might just want to ask a question like, oh, by the way, have you heard about this? I was wondering, and, let them do the thinking. Because the mistake most of us do is we have been in this I was at political field, with all the background information for such a long time. But just think back, how long of a process was it for you to get to this point? And how painful was it to actually acknowledging, yeah, I've been screwed over by my own government, so bad. People don't want to admit this because they feel shame for having been so stupid, to fall for this crap. So, but we need to keep in mind that, when you meet people, they may not necessarily be at that point. So
Right.
when you talk about, all of the things, they just, chalk you off as nutcase, completely nuts, and they will not listen to you anymore. So we need to take that into consideration. Then, if there is protests in nearby, join them, go there,
Mhm.
and if you do not have the courage yet to actually join them, go there anyway. Then stand on the side and just watch, take a look, and you'll be amazed what you will find out. Because
Mhm.
all of those nasty Nazis supposedly running around, there are no Nazis. There are people like you. But you may find out that the ones, that are the good ones, actually defending democracy and fighting for the people, they're the violent ones. They're throwing the stones. They're, dressed all in black. They're the worst of the worst. So, just take a look for yourself. Go there, form your own opinion, and then write to your representatives. Let them know that you are seeing through their crap and you no longer buy it, and tell them exactly what you expect them to do. Because we as elected representatives, we are not the boss. We are your servant. And this needs to be made clear, to the representatives again, because they got it all wrong when it comes to individual freedom. When did this happen that individual freedom became a threat to society? We once had a point of time where individual freedom meant freedom from government, but now it's freedom through government. This is absurd. So you cannot guarantee rights for any particular group by having the government step in and take care of this. This is not freedom. This is communism. It's as simple as that. And finally, it's a mindset too. And there is a quotation that comes to mind by Albert Camus. He once said, you need to become so absolutely free that your very existence becomes an act of rebellion.
Brilliant.
So get your mind into that state, and you will be surprised the look you will have on freedom. It's absolutely amazing.
That is a brilliant answer. I have to say, Christine, I've asked every guest on the podcast that question, and you get the gold medal. A brilliant answer. Thank you.
Okay,
We've
great.
taken we've taken a lot of your time here, and we're so grateful for it. What we do on this podcast, just to close out, is we try to sort of lead people towards other sources of information that they can access that would help them in their, let's say, journey of discovery, the kind that you just described. And so usually we give a bit of a reading list, point them to a website or some other source of information. If you don't mind, I'm just going to go first, and I'm going to let you close out with any suggestions you have. So mine is a book that I mentioned during our conversation. This is the Douglas Murray book called The Strange Death of Europe: Immigration, Identity, Islam. This is a really fascinating study, which has implications. It'll give the reader a whole new understanding of what's going on in Europe right now, but also it has much broader implications for Canada and the United States as well, because it describes the disintegration and really the destruction of Western culture. And here he talks about, it's a personal account of a continent and culture caught in the act of suicide. Declining birth rates, mass immigration, cultivated distrust, and self-hatred have come together to make Europeans, and I would say North Americans too, unable to argue for themselves and incapable of resisting their own comprehensive alteration as a society and an eventual end. And so I think that is a great book, as all of Douglas Murray's books are.
Yeah.
You understand part of the, let's call it the elitist agenda, which goes to destruction of Western culture, which of course is central to Europe and of course to North America, because in large degree we are the beneficiaries. we are the inheritors of the Western tradition of great civilizations, including Germany. So, Christine, can you point the people listening in to any sources of information that you think would be useful in terms of discovering new aspects of these topics that you've been talking about today?
Well, actually, I can recommend another book by Douglas Murray. It's called The Madness of the Crowd.
Oh, yes, brilliant book. Yes.
Yeah, that's really excellent. And the way he talks about it, how to get people hyped up and to fall in all of this basically just go along with whatever. It's really brilliant. I admire him a lot. Other than that, there is actually a book. It's called The Clash of Cultures.
Yes.
And I just forgot is it Hollaback or was it Huntington? I forget.
I think it's Huntington, but
I think it was Samuel Huntington. Right.
Yeah. So
right.
We can provide a link to that.
Right. And then there's another book that was by Michelle Hollaback. I just don't know what the English title was. In Germany is das Heer der Heiligen.
Okay.
Could you look this up real quick? Michelle Hollaback. It's basically he wrote this book in like the 90s, and it is about just a massive amount of refugees. Coming, washing up on shore, I should say, in France, and taking over the country. And it didn't raise too much. It didn't get recognized back then, but as the time progressed, obviously, then of course he was labeled with all of the stuff too, Islamophobe and whatever. But it's actually amazing. When you read that book and you look around what's happening today, it's I mean, it was pretty clear what was going to happen, to Europe. So so these are the books I would you can actually look into those. They're pretty interesting reads.
Thank you very much for that, Christine, and also for being so generous with your time and your mind. As I've said before, you are a heroine to many Canadians. You're very much admired in this country. I hope that I get the chance to meet you in person someday. But for now, danke 1000 Mal. Auf Wiedersehen.
Bitte schön, es war mir ein Vergnügen. Thanks a lot. It was really a pleasure being on. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.